This is the Powered Up Podcast, show 34.
Treat them as a person, make that connection, whatever it is, build that relationship, and figure out a way between the two of you, the three of you, whatever that number is going to be, and move on with your life. The kids don't come to school to be difficult necessarily. They don't come to school to not try to learn. A lot of times they just don't have the foundation to get there.
Welcome to a real-world education with insight and advice from teachers in the game, where current and former educators reveal what truly sets apart the great teachers and what it takes to make a positive impact on students. Whether you're in pre-service learning, new to the game, or a seasoned veteran, this is the show for you. You'll leave feeling inspired to take action because we are powering education by empowering you.
Hey, what's going on, everyone? This is Ken Ehrman, host of the Powered Up Podcast, and I am here with my co-host, as always, Mr. Matt Route 66 Rogers. Matt, Route 66, our guest today, he put everything on the line to be able to record with us. I once we got connected, I asked him 3 times, "Are you sure you don't want to reschedule?" And he didn't want to. He wanted to bring it today, and he did the entire thing. Thank God, safely. He did arrive from his car. So I was a little bit nervous, not for the quality of the recording, but for his safety. But he did make it to work on time. He's coming from California, so we're doing this in the morning for us on the East Coast. So he started his podcast recording with us at 6 a.m., driving on his way to work. And he also has a job interview today. So I think that speaks to the energy that he brings. What do you think?
I think that sums it up pretty well. Yeah, he's wonderful, and I think his perspectives are in an area specializing in special education that realistically I don't think we as regular ed teachers or generally teachers can spend enough time learning about, because what goes on in a special ed classroom and the variety of different needs and challenges that they face is just something that there needs to be a tremendous respect from all educators towards, and just listening to the advocacy side of things makes you encouraged and kind of get your mind right of what you need to do right for kids. You know, he lives and breathes for 1 year, 5 kids, at maybe his max caseload, or 15 kids. He lives and breathes everything he does for those 5 kids, 7 kids, whatever the case may be. And if he can do that for what feels like a small number of kids, what he views it as is, I'm making a massive difference in those 5 kids' lives. That kind of perspective shift is just incredible, and I think that's something we can all really receive and say, you know what, this is why I'm here, this is what I'm doing it for, and I want to try and create that experience in my classroom too.
Yeah, I totally agree, and I enjoyed the conversation. I feel like we had a nice bouncing perspective between his one, education as a second career, but his life in special ed and that specialty area. To me, on the regular ed side, having students included in my classroom, and you kind of that balance in between where you started in special ed and you transition to regular ed. And so for any teacher K-12, I think they're really going to be able to pull away some ideas of how to best support students, how to challenge students, and what is realistic for you to push the boundaries of their capabilities and yours as well as a classroom teacher, regardless of being on the special ed side, the regular ed, or somewhere in between. So without any further delay, let's jump into our interview with Tracy Scott Kelly. Hi, Tracy. Welcome to the Powered Up Podcast. How you doing today?
Morning, Ken. How you doing?
I'm doing very well. So we're really excited to have you here. We appreciate your time. To kick things off, why don't you officially introduce yourself to our audience, where you're coming from, and just kind of a brief snapshot of what your career in education has looked like.
Sure. I'll do the official title because I'm still trying to get used to it, but it's Dr. Tracy Scott Kelly. I put the Scott in there to make sure that there's no confusion between male or female Tracy or Kelly. As you can tell, I've got 3 first names, and so it gets confusing a little bit. I am I'm going to go with I'm a late bloomer. I didn't start my paid educational journey. It's a second career, so it's been 12, 13 years now. And so, but I'll real quick introduce my non-paid or my compensatory K-12 education. By the time I dropped out of high school, I was halfway through my 11th grade year, and I had been to 15 different schools at that point. Pretty, a good student, didn't cause much trouble, kept to myself, quiet, did my work. Academically, I was relatively strong. But, like a lot of kids, you get lost, confused, and if there's nobody that, at the school sites, if there's nobody that makes a connection, or if you don't make that connection, you kind of just lose it. At least that's what happened for me. So, I don't know, 30, 40 years later, whatever it was, I was, 39, I think, when I finished my bachelor's. A couple more years wandering around, and then met a woman that was a special ed teacher. It's like, oh, okay, yeah, I don't want to do anything about that. I don't want anything to do with education. And it turns out once I actually started substitute teaching and realized I could work every day in special ed, I started doing that. Then I realized how well I fit into special ed. Those were kids that are, they don't necessarily get a fair shake. They don't necessarily have somebody in their corner. And so it felt like home to me. So I went through, finished my couple credentials here in California, got my master's, and then finally, after a long hiatus trying to avoid my dissertation, I finally finished that thing. So I think that's a nutshell synopsis of my life.
Absolutely. I really appreciate everything that you shared, and I did spend a year subbing as well, and I like to describe it as the best worst experience. It's not fun to wake up to a phone call every day, or now like checking an app and going to a different school and constantly seeing new kids, but it is eye-opening. It definitely builds some chops for you as a teacher. It's a great way to observe different management styles, different teaching styles. And if you can at some point like be on the priority list where the same secretary calls you multiple days in a row, you start to feel better about yourself. But it really helps you learn a lot. And, like you said, it helps you find your niche of where you are in education. Are you still actively teaching, or have you moved into leadership roles now?
So it's, let me try this way. I say that only because I'm on my way. Well, an hour after my day starts, I actually have an interview this morning for a teacher on special assignment, which pulls me out of the classroom, but still at the school site. Today's just one of those busy days, because then I have, in case you're not aware, Ken, I'm on the school board for my local district. So then I have a training after that, just one of those days.
That's crazy.
But I spent my first, I think, 7 years in the classroom. And then I was already teaching adjunct at the local university. So then I got an offer to move to the university, thinking that was going to be phenomenal, because that was my retirement plan, finish after I retire K-12 to go into the university. Then I realized the only benefit to the university was less pay, the same problems, just better language, or more academic language. So that bubble kind of burst. But I think it's still I still want to be adjunct again, and or maybe retire that way. Who knows? So I've been in the classroom. I think this is the end of year 11 at the K-12. And one of the things about California is we have 2 types of special ed credentials: a mild moderate, which is typically your RSP, like that, and then a mod severe, which can be anywhere from autism to pre-vocational to whatever. And I know for the most part on the East Coast, you guys call that a behavior type class. So I can do all of it, and I've spent time in all of those different classes and different positions, pretty evenly throughout my career. For some reason, the mod severe population or the behavior population just keeps calling me back. And as you were saying, during being a substitute, it tells you what you can and can't do, or teaches you a whole lot of things. And for some odd reason, I have really become a specialist in behaviors, modifying those, shall we say, sometimes violent, sometimes just loud, sometimes whatever. And it's just, most of the time it's just communication, right? It's just, we don't know how to communicate with what the kids are trying to communicate with us, initially anyway.
I think it's one of those situations. So, Tracy, I'm a former special ed teacher, more itinerant learning support, but definitely supported in the autistic support classroom, the emotional support classroom. And I think what you tap into it is a special set of skills by all means, but realistically, it's a more personal experience with kids that really need your attention. And that's one of the things that I loved about special education was we would sit down, and what I crave, which is small groups in the regular ed environment that I'm in now, was my life in special ed if it wasn't even one-to-one or 3 adults per 1 student in a classroom, which is, again, an environment that seems overkill, but it's the best thing for kids in that situation. But it's also a high intensity, high stress, legally binding, like tightrope of different things that you have to navigate. And to feel like you are comfortable not only just with strategies. I always felt good with strategies with kids, but it was all the red tape and all the limitations and creating SDIs that you could actually implement and goals that you could actually monitor and feel like you were doing justice. Kind of talk to that level of the professional side, but also the kid side of things, because it is a beautiful dance of trying to manage both of those.
No, and Matt and I do appreciate that. And I noticed I just had a glitch on my side, so hopefully you guys can still hear me. I'm going to start with my wife gave me a hard time last night when I told her about my day today. She goes, "Wait a minute, you're doing another podcast without me?" I'm like, "Hey, whatever. You didn't want to be in my car at 6 a.m. And we actually, and I only mentioned, well, I mentioned her, 1, because she's my wife, but 2, I will share this every day with anybody that ever asks, is if it wasn't for her, I would not be in special ed. And I don't know that I could ever repay her for that. And she knows how valuable that is to me, because it actually made me feel like I was at home no matter what school or classroom I was in. So that it's just life altering to finally find your place in the world, and this happens to be mine.
Well, it's funny you mentioned that, because the only reason we invited you onto the podcast was actually just to try to get access to get your wife on the podcast on a later episode.
Yeah, and believe me, because we've done a few together, and we just have a party whenever we're in there together, because we're very similar as far as our work attitude, but beyond that, we are opposites, and it's just hilarious. We just have a good time. So, no, feel free. Plus, you wanted to be able to have that on recording where I said she was phenomenal, right? I'm sure.
Exactly.
But, teaching in the classes that we teach in, it is, and not that gen ed's any different, because it's just a different, I guess. But in special ed classes, it can be a mental and physical workout each and every day for day after day after day. And, it's a choreographed dance, if you want to call it that, because you know what you think to expect, but it can go off the rails so quickly, and if you're not paying attention, you don't know why. So yeah, it is, that's, well, man, there's so many things running through my head at this moment. All right, let's start with the legal part of it. Yeah, there's a lot of confidentiality issues. There's a lot of ways you can for lack of a better word, decorate your classroom or supply your classroom, or even allow people to come into your classroom to see things that you have in your classroom. IEPs and IDEA, it's a relatively simple process to quote unquote fill out a form, but to understand how that form actually or just the annual meeting becomes a textbook for that student for that next school year, or even calendar year, depending on how you want to look at it, it's heavy, right? It's really heavy with content. It's really heavy with strategies. It's heavy with student knowledge, parent knowledge, that whole family dynamic, but then also what your administrator at the school site has, what your special director of student support. So it's everything, right? There is so much. And I remember my first year, I was in an autism classroom. It was K-5 school. I don't know if I said 5 kids or not, but I had 5 students, K-5 school, 2 paraprofessionals and myself, and it was my first year. I didn't have any issues. I'm like, okay, well, this is pretty simple. No extra IEPs, not a big deal. Everything seemed to flow pretty well. And then my wife said, well, just so you know, it's 1 year on, 1 year off, 1 year on, 1 year off. I'm like, what do you mean? Well, evidently that was my good year. And then the next year, more kids, more IEPs, but still at the same school site. And truthfully, like I said, because I felt so comfortable with fitting in that position, knowing that there aren't a lot of people that believe they can even teach special ed, especially autism or some of the heavier disabilities, it gives you a lot of confidence. It makes you feel like you're actually making a difference. And the time I got to spend with those kids in a one-on-one, once you get your routine figured out and their schedules, it can be life-altering. It really can teach you enough about yourself to realize you can handle whatever you want to handle.
Yeah, I completely agree with the both of you. And coming from the perspective of only ever working in a regular ed classroom, in my school where I spent the good portion of the beginning of my career teaching 5th grade, we had obviously we had itinerant learning support like any school would have, and then our school in our district had the autistic support program as well. And it was more of the students that were included in most subjects. They were typically pulled out for social skills, OT, PT, things like that, but they were included for most of the day. And I had them in my room my first year just by rotational standards, and then I had them in my room every year after that because, one, I absolutely loved having that group of students in my room. The autistic support teacher felt that they clicked very well with me, and I had a great deal of empathy and I gave them a great deal of support to help them be successful, but I had really high expectations for them. And I really wanted to push their boundaries of comfort and of ability to really stretch themselves. And I think that I think it's so important for teachers to do that. So I would love to hear your opinion on the regular ed side of being the teacher that is having these students push in and included in your classroom. What do you think are key strategies or approaches that we can take to help them be more successful in that regular ed setting?
Oh, how big of a can of worms are you wanting to open? Okay, give me a second because my thoughts once again are just flying through my head because so the strategies that we employ in special ed, and the more severe that you get, the more fundamental these strategies are. They're not they're life-altering, but they're not highly academic strategies. They're very simple. Appreciate the person for a person. I think that is the easiest one. The person is a person. They don't know how to necessarily communicate the way you may be used to, but so what? They're still a person. They still deserve your time and attention. With that being said, I believe if you can teach people that don't understand motivation, then you can teach anybody. And I relate that back to the gen ed because at this, once again, once I went to the university, I'm teaching those that want to become teachers, whether it was special ed or gen ed, because I did classes for both. And it's a matter of, wait a minute, I spend all day trying to motivate people that not only don't want to be motivated, they occasionally can have extreme behaviors telling me that they don't want to be motivated. So when you get a kid that just is having, if you go back to the gen ed and you have a kid that's having a bad day and, used a 4-letter word against you, so what? He didn't throw a desk at you. I mean, it's just a 4-letter word, right? And it's the same strategy. Treat him as a person, him or her, that we know special ed is disproportionately male. Treat him as a person, make that connection, whatever it is, build that relationship, and figure out a way between the two of you, the three of you, whatever that number is going to be, and move on with your life. The kids don't come to school to be difficult necessarily. They don't come to school to not try to learn. A lot of times they just don't have the foundation to get there. So if you're coming back to the special ed side of it, it is definitely have the high expectations. When I first started, I think my middle son was born in 2010, and 2010-11 was my first contract year. So after he was 1 or 2 and we started noticing problems with him or some concerns with him, a lot of things that I was doing in my classroom, actually I could do at home and vice versa. So Grayson, who was born in 2010, by the time he was 18 months, we were having 2 special ed parents, right? The world's going to fall apart because they know every little thing. And in 18 months, he wasn't following what we expected to be his, what do they call them?
Milestones.
Thank you. Yeah, milestones. So we called out the county education, and they come out, and they assess them. Well, he had a 25% hearing loss because he had ear infections up to that whole point, and we had no idea. He wasn't making any noise. He didn't appear to be uncomfortable. Luckily, we knew enough to look for some signs, the milestones that he wasn't hitting. And in case you don't know, blonde hair, blue-eyed children, especially boys, have issues with ear infections quite a bit because they're just so sensitive to everything. And I should have paid enough attention because I apparently was a blonde-haired, blue-eyed kid and should have known. But we started ear tubes with him back before he was even 2. But the point is, I was able to use what I was doing in the classroom at home and what I was doing at home in the classroom. I mean, because Grayson wasn't communicating, we started learning sign. I'd take signs in my classroom. Even if it was just simple classroom or school-specific signs, my kids were starting to learn to communicate in a way that I communicated with them. The paras, we started communicating that way, doing simple things. And so when they weren't at speech, we were doing signs at that same allotted time in our schedule. Communication. That's what it boils down to. And like I said, were their signs way off because they didn't have the fine motor? Sure. But they were close enough for us to understand, and we developed with them and grew with them to open up that strategy of communication. Because that's, for the most part, that's really what it boils down for my experience, is if you can't communicate, what's the point of anything else? And it's our job as professionals to learn how to communicate the way they need to communicate with us.
Absolutely. And the way we communicate with the students, the way we communicate with the team. My role as a regular education teacher is vital in being a good team player and communicating well with the special ed teacher, the paraprofessionals, everyone involved to help make all students successful, and especially those special ed students. And I think it's important to communicate to the students, depending on the age level and just the type of students that you're working with, but being very open and honest. I mean, for the autistic the students with autism included in my class, typically, one of the key things is like they need to know the schedule, they need to know the routines. Like that's really important to help them feel successful. I had students succeed in my flexible classroom where it literally started empty, and we designed the entire space it was, to describe it, in chaos. And I was just open with the students. I communicated with the students. I had the paraprofessionals prepared. We were prepared to adjust as the students needed. And I'll never forget, I had one student who, when they started, we had like lockers made out of crates, and we didn't have enough crates as we started the year. So some kids brought in boxes, and this one student brought in a box. By October, this thing was like falling apart. And I was saying, are you ready to move to a crate? He didn't want to give up his box. It was his box. So I spent the entire year reconstructing the box, strengthening the box, duct taping it, putting pieces of wood in there to hold it together to make sure that it would last the entire year for him, because that was his piece in that classroom that he didn't want to give up. And it was so simple, and it didn't take that much time for me to do, but it was important to him. And it's just, those things that you can do to support those students, they'll feel more successful in your classroom.
Willing to bet that he will never forget somebody spending the time on his box, his piece of that classroom, that you can't replace that. I mean, you can't, much like this conversation, it's very organic, right? You can't plan that one student's going to have this one thing that they want forever, and it just happens.
Well, with the work I put into it, he better still have that box.
Hey, real quick, if you don't mind, I realized I didn't hit the inclusion and exclusivity, that the whole point of that was. And if you haven't known by now or haven't figured it out, I go off in tangents and I still make a point. I just don't know if they make the point I'm supposed to. So real quick, that's one of the things that I used to dislike about No Child Left Behind, is it was 100%, and that's difficult in anything, right? But now that we don't have it, we've kind of lost that. And now we're saying we're coming back to it with inclusion, so to speak. I believe that you should have as many kids as you can in the gen ed setting with whatever support you need, because that's best for everybody. And by best, I mean it sets the tone for the rest of their life. So anyway, we'll move on wherever you guys need me to go.
Well, honestly, I kind of want to go down that route anyway. And just to kind of tap in, I don't think we talk about least restrictive environment enough. And one of some of the conversations Ken and I have had is, what are good strategies for newer teachers or teachers that are listening to this? And realistically, we talk about how the secretary runs the building. But if you want to learn how to be a good teacher, spending time with paraprofessionals from the special ed classroom, they are the people that bail everyone out. And I remember from being in the special ed world that if you want to understand how to deal with the hardest day, go sit with a special ed teacher, because when you can't tinker or adjust something or de-escalate, they have the skills and the know-how on how to really deal with the challenges. Because at the end of the day, when you call for a team member or you call for support, they're the ones showing up at your door, and they just have incredible skills. That it's one of the greatest resources. That when I grew up, the special ed team was the place you didn't want to spend time. And Tracy, what you were kind of talking about is good instructional practices are good instructional practices. We've echoed that over and over again. The special ed team, really, when you talked about it, is simple because it's structured as can be. If we're doing an incentive plan, then it is a true immediate incentive plan that gets kind of phased out as the kids prepare for it, but the structure is incredibly stable for kids that they can depend on it. And that's what they need, and it's incredibly difficult to pull that in when you have a class of 18, 25, whatever that might be. But to recognize certain things, like in your position, structure and no surprises is probably the biggest thing that I take into the regular ed. How do I create systems? How do I create things? And I know Ken is really strong at that. And that's where, whether it's autistic support, emotional support, learning support, multi-disabilities, you're having people in and out of the classroom, the structure of having that stability is a huge feature, and that allows, kind of like what you're talking about, inclusion, to be fluid. A kid can come in if they know what the system's going to be and leave pretty seamlessly. And my goal as a regular ed teacher now is to keep my kids as long as possible, to not need them to go down, whether it's for a break. Obviously, they need it. So, and it's written in their IP that they'll get it. But my goal is to decrease the amount of supports they need because A, they're integrated into the class environment, B, they're intrinsically motivated on what we're doing, and C, they have the supports in my classroom to be as successful as possible.
Matt, couldn't agree more. And once again, I've got probably a dozen things I want to mention just from that brief piece that you just shared with us. And man, so yesterday for ESY or summer school, ESY, I volunteered to take on basically 2 classes. And when I say 2 classes, it doesn't mean it's a ton of kids. It just means it's 2 types of classes. And one of the classes I have is I was talking about yesterday with one of the paras, is it's basically the most restrictive environment you can be for a kid in K-12. Medically fragile. This one student has cerebral palsy, He is tube fed. I mean, there's a ton of things that he has working against him, but his parents still send him to school. He's still going through the process as best we can. So that's one kid that I have. But then I have a couple more that are in the classroom, and then a couple that are virtual at this point. And so to hear least restrictive environment, knowing that I spoke about most restrictive, which is not a thing, but we know it's a thing, yesterday makes me realize that how much we do and don't do and what we can and do and help and blah, blah, blah. But it is. I mean, does a kid that's in what I'm calling, once again, the most restrictive, does he need to be in gen ed? Is there a benefit to him and everybody else? Going to be a bigger benefit to everybody else, but it's not a benefit to him because of his health and every other thing that he needs. It just doesn't work. So that's why 100% doesn't need to happen. But we still want to shoot for it to the best of our abilities or the most efficient way for everybody. Man, where else did that go?
Well, while you're gathering your thoughts, I think we as I think that's the beauty of at least how I'm feeling in my school environment. And I don't want to broadcast, I hope it is, that shift from your kid to our kid type language is really important. So in this situation that medically fragile and there's a lot of conditions, if they just the best thing is them being in the presence of their classmates and really not instructionally getting a lot of instructional time in my classroom, but that's the best thing for them, and that's maybe what excites them about school. Or you guys in the special ed wing can pull some of those experience. Maybe we do a thing around Thanksgiving where we talk about manners and the kids invite a person from the school. And there are so many teachable things that the special ed side has some flexibility while also having extreme amounts of kind of mandates of what they have to do. But the beauty behind it is it's what's good for kids, and they may spend an entire week preparing to come down to my classroom for science class. And that's incredible to think that that's the amount of preparation that goes in. But we, as at this point, the general ed, have to recognize that that is a huge milestone. And the fact that I had to limit my 10-question quiz down to 3 questions because that was most appropriate, even though a lot of people struggle with, oh, what's the grade at the end of it? It's not about that. It's the development. And you, Tracy, and special ed, just like leaders and rock stars, see incremental changes because you're always with the kids. And I think that's the other thing that I would want to say is, as a regular ed teacher, even though that I was a special ed teacher, the last thing I want to do is walk into the special ed department and say, this is how I feel about a kid. Because you guys spend so much more time, and even though you probably don't have the kind of priority of 4th grade standards in my classroom, you know and can differentiate on the fly, which is pretty incredible. Just that need to adjust and make it a successful experience.
And I do appreciate that, because once again, I don't want to toot my own horn, and I try not to. My wife tells me that I should be more humble. I'm like, whatever. But it's those small things that we can do to help that kid. And truthfully, when we're helping that kid, we're helping the entire family, right? And that's the true grade for us, is were we able to help that family? Because once they leave, they're 22, depending on 18, 22, depending on what your classification is. They've got a whole lifetime with them. And not only that, they had them before we even met them. They have them every night. They have, supposedly they're supposed to be sleeping for 8 hours, but how many special ed kids get 8 hours of sleep a night, continuous? How many gen ed kids even get 4 or 6, Seriously. Right? Especially the older they get. And that's my biggest. Especially when I was with the K-5, the younger kids especially. I started asking parents, that first IEP meeting, or even when I first met them, what do you want for your child once they leave the K-12 system? Because if you don't start setting that up early, and way too many teachers don't even understand what that means, whether it's gen ed or special ed, it doesn't make a difference. If the parents can't start planning for what they want that kid when they leave K-12, we've really done a disservice. And as you get into the high school and the older ages, you're talking conservatorship and who's going to take care of that child when you're gone. Because, it's especially a high needs kid. If you're 20, 30 years older than them as a parent, I would hope that you would start looking at what's going to happen when you're gone, because the odds are it's going to happen that way. So, going back to the paras real quick, because obviously almost everything comes out of either one of your mouths, makes me go somewhere. And the paras are such an important, not even a piece. Truthfully, for me, they are the classroom leaders, because typically I'm not coming into a newly formed classroom. I'm coming into a classroom that has been formed, has already been developed, and I'm just the next cog in the wheel, so to speak, quite often. And without them, without the paras having, and I'm not a big fan of this word, but without the buy-in from the paras, they make or break the classroom. Yeah, I can Absolutely. Have the best strategies in the world, even though I don't always remember their names. I know how to make them work. But if I don't have that support from the paras don't feel comfortable enough with me to know that I'm going to take care of the kids or students they've spent the last 3, 5, 7 years with. What's the point of I'm just taking up oxygen in that classroom, keeping the desk, the chair and the desk warm. And if you don't have a bad day with the paras, you don't appreciate the good days and how strong they really are. We've got in my current school, we've had a para that has just finished his, he's just become eligible to be a PIP, which basically is, he's not quite an intern because he hasn't done enough work as academically to become an intern or a pre-teacher, for whatever word you want to use. And he's been a one-on-one for the last year that I've known him, but prior to that, he's been a para with a one-on-one for 5 years. And typically, if you're a one-on-one, that kid has shown major deficits as far as what we would call what's acceptable in the gen ed classroom. And he's going to be a mild moderate teacher or an intern, forget what word you guys used, teacher, but he's got the skill set of a mod severe or a behavior classroom teacher. And it's huge for special ed. It's huge for those families that he will deal with as he moves through his career. But yeah, I don't think we can ever show them enough love and support for what they do for the kids, what they do for education, but what they do for us as the teachers. They make us look bad or good depending on how we treat them.
Absolutely.
And I don't know how many lunches I've bought, how many birthdays I've celebrated, but It's never going to be enough for me
Yep.
to show my appreciation to them.
And again, what it comes down to is they bail you out all the time. You know, if it's one of those things that the classroom's starting to get unruly, they lock down the most challenging situation to allow you to kind of deal with the circus that's going on elsewhere. And I totally agree. It is there's just never enough thanks to go along. But I know I want to be respectful of your time, but I think that part of being in special ed is being an advocate. And a lot of times that's being an advocate for kids and families, but it's also being an advocate for your own department and the services that you provide. And whether you can boil this down, I know could be a challenge, but if there's one thing that someone who's listening, and we're talking about the importance and the value of special ed and the value of the kids and all of that, but there's a lot of misnomers and there's a lot of false thoughts about being a special ed teacher, whether it's hey, they're a different teacher, they're not as good, whatever the case may be. What would you say as an advocate of a lover of special ed, a lover of support, a lover of kids, to kind of bridge that gap and draw someone who's listening to say, you know what, that should be my priority, to build skills or build connections with special education, or to just be more comfortable with having kids with special needs, to view it as an enhancement, or to see a special side of a kid as opposed to seeing it as a negative or a challenge?
Okay, man. All right.
I know
so it really boils down to a few simple things, but I'm going to start back with our teacher preparation programs, because I know in California's main two university systems that we only used to have one class for gen ed teachers to give them an overview of special ed. That's a problem, especially now that we're talking inclusion, right? Major problem. Well, in the last couple of years, those systems, at least one of those two systems, has said, well, they don't need that much. We're just going to incorporate that knowledge in another class. Okay, so we've got a major problem, right? That's our major problem to start with. But the second thing, so obviously that needs to be corrected, adjusted, dealt with, whatever. But once you actually sign that first contract or a substitute or whatever it may be that your career starts off with, I have a major problem with experienced teachers telling first-year teachers or even second-year teachers, well, don't make a fuss until you get tenure. And I only say that because, one, especially if you're an under 25-year-old coming into education and that's, you think, going to be your career, I get not creating a fuss, not stepping outside of your perceived comfort zone. I happened to have the opportunity that I was a second career, so it wasn't as important. But the reason I bring that up is because if you start your career and don't make any noise supporting your kids or yourself, whether it's gen ed, special ed, the custodian, I don't care. If you're not true to yourself, you've actually set up an expectation from your administrators that you're going to be compliant, complacent, you're just going to go about your classroom. But you've also set it up for the same thing for your colleagues. They're going to expect, okay, well, they're not going to make any noise, they're not going to be a problem. I can manipulate, if that's what they need to do, to get them to do part of my work, not necessarily all of their work. That's a problem for me. Because if you have 2 years of habits of not making any noise, and it doesn't have to be a ton of noise, and it doesn't have to be negative noise. If you're not living up to what you expect from yourself, you've now changed what you expect from yourself once you receive tenure in the rest of your career. So you can't be an advocate if you've become complacent and compliant. It's internally, right? If you're in your own mind saying, well, I can't make any noise today because my principal is going to come observe me and I'm nervous to death. Who cares about being nervous to death? That's internal. Accept it and move on. So yeah, and the noise doesn't have to be, well, I can't advocate for my kids because my administrators are going to say, well, they're a troublemaker, they don't need to be here. If that's how your administrator views you because you advocated what they supposedly say, which is kids first, and they're not being kids first, you don't need to be there anyway. Or
Yeah.
maybe you do because you need to change that culture of that school. So, one, we need to adjust how we prepare teachers in the classroom. First and foremost, start there. Second, each teacher should understand who they are at that moment and where they're in that career. And if you can't advocate for yourself, you're not going to be able to advocate for kids. And it doesn't mean that you have to go in there and say, I know everything, everybody else is wrong, these are what my kids need. If that's your first or second year, you may not even know those kids very well anyway.
Mm-hmm.
Open your mouth, good, bad, or indifferent. Accept and justify what you're doing is what you think is best for the kids, but be open enough to understand that other people have, the parents especially, have more experience and understand it better. So trust your parents, work with your parents, gain as much you can from them, and on the flip side of that, mentor those parents if you think you can help them, because they're still people. They still want to learn more. Typically, they want, if you're working with the kids, work with the parents, make sure, do the best you can to push everybody's boundaries, high expectations for yourself, for your parents, for your students, for your administrators. If you don't feel that you're in the right spot with the right administrator, okay, no big deal. Understand who they are and what you need to do to make yourself better, because they may end up being a great mentor for you, or they may be saying they never were capable and you outdo them, but you've achieved what you want to achieve. So there's a lot of different things there, but one, preparation programs need to change or should change. Two, don't necessarily believe others when they tell you to keep your mouth closed or you won't learn something. You deal with yourself internally and do what you need to do to get there.
I think that's incredibly wise, and I think that's the thing that I didn't recognize coming out of college and going into a learning support classroom was how big of advocacy that really is. And it's with respect. Obviously you want to have respect, but the other beauty, and Tracy, you didn't necessarily have this as the second career, but there is a window of time where you as a new teacher are allowed to make mistakes, and that is totally fine. And it is those first few years. When you become a 5 or 6 year teacher and you're starting to ruffle feathers because of advocacy, or you're trying something new, your window for making major mistakes is a lot smaller. Whereas a new teacher, you know what, if you are a long-term sub and you don't get hired back, you can go and your life isn't completely dependent on you switching schools or finding a different environment. I think that's a really wise, important thing that we need to recognize, because at the end of the day, if I feel at the end of the day that I'm doing what I thought was the best thing for kids, then I can put my head up high and believe that I did the right thing in and out of each day.
Well, and that's where the justification starts, is you're doing it for what is best for kids. So if you make a mistake or you take a wrong turn and your colleagues or your administrator, they're talking with you, they're questioning about what you're doing, you start, this is why I did this. I thought this would be best for this child because, or, I completely agree with you as well, Tracy. Like, waiting to ruffle feathers or to make noise is ridiculous. You should be doing what's best for you and best for the kids in front of you. And if you feel there's something that needs to change or it needs to be done slightly differently, it doesn't need to be major changes that you're questioning everything about the school, but go to your principal and say, here's a question I have. Here's something that I feel can be different. Here's why. Here's how it benefits students. And here's what I think I should do. So you're not just going and saying, this is wrong. You're going and saying, I want to change this, and here's how I think it should change. And that way they can respond to you and say, that's a great idea. I want you to try it. Or, you know what, it does need some potential change, but let's look at your idea and tweak it from there and collaborate together. And so it's a very productive, professional way to make noise and to do what's best for your students. So I do want to be respectful of your time, and I want to jump into a segment that we do with all of our guests. It's called our exit ticket, the same 4 questions we ask every guest every week. And question number 1 is, what is the best thing a teacher can do to make a student's school experience better?
Okay, do you mind if I go back to one more thing before we get into that question?
Please.
Or to that answer?
Absolutely.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay, so for that teacher that is unsure of how to approach their administrator, whether it's a department chair, it could be anything, anybody that you view as above you in your hierarchy, right, is go in and ask, can you explain to me, or can you help me understand why we do this way? Because once you understand why we do it, it's going to open your eyes to how you best address it. So go
That's
in
a great
and ask,
point.
why do we do it this way? Reflect on that for a while, because you're obviously into reflection enough to try to be a better teacher, to be a more efficient teacher, and then adjust how you need to adjust. Okay, so if you wouldn't mind asking that question again.
Absolutely. Yep, absolutely. So question number 1 for the exit ticket: what is the best thing a teacher can do to make a student's school experience better?
Okay, so obviously best because is always an opinion, right? And so this is my chance to view or give you my opinion.
Yep.
Give them, and not just them as students, them as your colleagues, them as anybody in life. Give them the best you every day, whatever that is. So we're not going to be 100% every day. Some days we're lucky to do 75. But present yourself as the best you can that day. And for me, my takeaway is, if I can make somebody else's life better, I've done the best me that I can. And so that's what I put out every day, because I only have today. I may only have this next 5 minutes, who knows? But be the best you, and that will make everybody around you a better version of themselves.
I love that.
That's super. And honestly, that kind of leads into the next question. What is a piece of advice that you think of that you've received from a colleague or a supervisor or even a student that you think of to, even if it's 75% is your best, to bump it to 80? What's something that kind of rings true to you that gets you amped up and to make the best version of yourself?
Okay, so in case you haven't noticed, I'm typically amped up. I don't know if it's just who I was born to be, or if I've trained myself this way. But when I'm on, I'm on. And when I am exhausted, I pass out and go to sleep. And so I start each day as a new person, because I know that I've done what I've could to improve myself day to day. But I think the biggest thing for me is the statistics of life. There is no reason in the world, statistically, of course, that I should be a doctor. There's no reason I should still be alive. There's no reason I shouldn't be either dead or in prison. Because up till the time I was probably 53, I felt I was going to be gone from this planet or this earth by the time I was 50. The statistics of my life, and I've got one of my best friends from high school that can prove this, because we were raised pretty much the same way, single parent, poor, welfare, whatever you want to call it, all of that I didn't think I was going to live past 50. And I woke up a couple of days, at this point, either a year ago, a couple of months ago, and said, you know what? I'm over 50. How the fudge did that happen? And so you plan your life differently. I didn't plan on, what would I need a retirement for? I'm going to be dead. And I don't say that to be a negative. I say that because we are, if for me, I am my best champion. I mean, there are a ton of people that have supported me and helped me get to where I'm at. And I think I'm going to give the credit every day to my mom, because for overcoming everything she did, she knew that she had to get out of that situation. And she, bits and pieces, as she kept the family together, it was, you can be anything you want. And some days, especially earlier in my career, that something was, let me see if I can piss off one person a day, because then I know I'm doing something, right? I've got under their skin for some reason. Well, now it's a matter of how can I make your life better? But understanding that you have one life, you have one attempt at this, and living is actually on-the-job training, because we don't know how we're going to act in each and every situation. We hopefully learn and mature to know that we want to do the best we can, and we're going to make mistakes. We're going to piss people off, whether we intend to or not. But if you're comfortable enough in your own skin, and you can appreciate and understand that being complacent and compliant is extremely important and respectful, you need to be that way as well. But if you're not outspoken, good, bad, or indifferent, if you're not drawing attention to yourself, nobody's going to understand and appreciate what you bring to the table. And I've got what do I have? My kids are 9 and 11 that are at home. And just so you know, I've got grandkids the same age, which is weird, but it is what it is. I want them to be respectful, but I also want them to push that envelope. And I practice that each and every day. Running for the school board, I didn't know what the fudge I was doing. I just knew that I wanted to show my children, your comfort level should be other people's uncomfort level. And I only say that because I am so comfortable with change that I actually desire and search out change so that I'm comfortable. Sitting around having a 9-to-5 job, whether it's teaching or underwater basket weaving, I don't care. If that's your entire life, I think you're shortchanging yourself. And it doesn't matter your academic level. It doesn't matter anything else. I don't want to leave this world knowing that I could have done something else or having regrets that I should have tried this earlier. Just try it. Just do it. The worst case is you fail, but guess what? When you fail, you've learned something. So don't be a butthole about it. Be respectful, play within the rules, but understand there's a lot of gray in those rules.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree with that more. You're talking to two people that believe in, really pushing ourselves to try new things and just see where it leads you. So the school year goes in waves. We have those pockets of very stressful times, report cards, conferences. You have 5 IEPs due all in the same week. What is something that you want to say to teachers feeling that stress to help them power out?
Okay, well, I think the simplest answer is coffee. Make sure you figure out a way to find your right flavor, your right your taste that you need. And I only say that one because, well, first of all, caffeine helps a lot of us, but not necessarily we don't need it. But I've had some coffee lately that I've made that just wasn't right. It's like, no, I need a certain flavor today. Reflect enough to know that you could have planned a little better. But even still, no matter how much we plan, it's always going to get crazy. Take a deep breath. Believe in yourself for getting to this point, because if you aren't feeling the stress, you're not necessarily as prepared as you want to be. And no, take a deep breath. Take a deep breath. Understand that the time is going to pass, and you have done enough. I mean, if you look at the IEPs, I know that I've written IEPs, not even the last 25% in that meeting, because truthfully, it's supposed to be organic anyway. Yes, we prepare as much as we can, but things happen in that meeting that should, not always, but they're going to adjust our thinking about that student, about that parent, about that family, about that administrator that's still on their fudging phone, right? Things are going to change in that meeting. And if it's not 100% wrote, whatever word you want to use, it's okay, because you're going to pull out things from that meeting that are going to modify the way you think about it anyway. Report cards, we all have deadlines, and yes, there's quite often that we are, 11:58, we're still putting in the last grades, and that's okay, because it's okay. Is it life-threatening if you don't get it turned in on time? It feels like it, but guess what? The administrators have planned for that, and there's an extra couple days that you can still adjust. Or, well, these grades don't look right. Can you do X, Y, and Z? Because guess what? I don't see them on my end. is what the administrators or their staff is going to say. There's time built in. Don't expect it, but do the best you can today because that's all you have. That's it. It's 24 hours passes in 24 hours. We can't change that, but put in as much as you can and move on.
Too true. And I think that's something that I have to remember, that my fourth grade report card didn't adjust how my life turned out. Maybe it's a little different in the high school, but the idea of like, maybe we have a different set of priorities and we need to care about kids. Tracy, honestly, you've shared some awesome things. I'm amped up after this conversation and excited to be interacting with kids and making a difference each day. To continue learning with you, what would be the best way for our audience to connect with you in the future?
Okay, so should I give my Venmo account number, even though I don't even know what that is? But, Twitter is my social media of preference, only because so I'm on Facebook, I'm on Instagram, I'm on Twitter. I'll share all those shortly if I can remember them. But I look at Facebook, and I just joined another advocacy Facebook group yesterday, but I look at it as medicinal marijuana. And I only say that because it kind of slows down. It's kind of, you take your time. It's here, it's there. But Twitter is crack to me. It is fast. It's quick. I can't get enough PD out of it. But it just happens so quickly. But don't let it consume your life. So we'll go with Twitter. Twitter is at Tracy Scott Kelly, TracyScottKelly, and my preferred. I think Instagram is Tracy Kelly 67 or Tracy Kelly 1967, something like that. But it's more of Facebook and Instagram for me are mostly me posting pictures of my neighborhood in the morning because it's extremely peaceful and recharging. It's very calming. And then Facebook, I don't know, Tracy Kelly 1967, something like that. I know currently it shows me as running for school board, which I obviously have already ran and I was elected and woohoo, yay. But I'm changing points of view on there as well, right? I'm still advocating for kids in a different way, but it gives me a great synopsis or a great picture of what I do in the classroom, how it affects the district and or vice versa, right? What am I doing at the district level as a trustee to help that one kid in my wife's classroom who can't wear a mask today, right? It's all of the above. So I think that's all my handles, I think.
Perfect. We really appreciate you sharing that. We will link to all of your handles in our show notes page, which can be found as always on our website, which is powereduup.com/show34 for this episode. Tracy, we really appreciate your time. You squeezed us in between 100 different things but you gave us it all, and we really enjoyed this conversation. You shared a lot of insight. You shared a lot of real expectations, and just the truth about so many different topics related to special ed and education in general. So we really appreciate your time. Your school is clearly very lucky to have you. Your community was very intelligent to elect you to school board so that you can make change from a different perspective, but still holding true to your values. So I'm excited to see what you can do for that community. So thanks again. And Matt, why don't you close down shop for us here today?
All right. So as we power down this episode, Tracy, you left us feeling powered up. Appreciate the time. Everyone be good and healthy, and the school year will be here before you know it. So do those last little things and make sure you're ready to go to be your best self when you're back in the classroom. We'll talk to you guys next week.
Thank you, gentlemen. I appreciate it.